It started like one of those evenings where everything feels too polished to be real. We were at a charity gala in Manhattan, one of those events where the room smells like aged whiskey and wealth, where people shake hands too long and smile too wide. Amelia had spent days preparing for it. She picked out her dress weeks in advance, tested different hairstyles, even rehearsed small talk. I remember asking her, jokingly, "Is this a fundraiser or a red carpet?" She laughed. "It's both. It's good PR. You know how these things work." And I did, at least I thought I did. The ballroom was grand. Huge chandeliers, crisp linens, and the kind of orchestral music that makes you stand straighter even if you don't realize it. I came in a bit later than her. Amelia had arrived early to meet with her team, all part of some corporate charm offensive her department was doing for one of their partners. I didn't think anything of it. She was always the type who thrived in rooms like this. Confident, magnetic, the kind of woman people naturally gathered around. When I walked in, I spotted her right away, centered in a circle of colleagues and executives, laughing. She was wearing this deep red dress I'd never seen before, not the color she usually wore to these events. She always said red was too loud, but tonight she owned it, and everyone noticed, especially him, Mark Taylor, her department head. Tall, silver hair, always a little too charming. We'd met a few times before. The kind of guy who always called me buddy and gave off the vibe of someone who flirted with HR violations like they were part of his job description. Still, I played it cool. Shook hands, made some small talk with a few people, and joined the group casually. She introduced me like I was just another pleasant accessory in her life. "This is my husband," she said with that smile she gives when she's managing impressions. Not affectionate, not cold, just rehearsed. And I stood there, sipping champagne, watching her hold court like she was born to do this. Maybe a part of me felt proud. Maybe another part already knew something was off. But I pushed it down. This wasn't the place. Then it happened. She reached into her clutch for something. Lip gloss or her phone? I don't even remember. And out fluttered a small white card. It landed near her heels, face up, perfectly visible under the low, golden light. Room for two. Breakfast included. A hotel keycard insert. She froze for a fraction of a second, just long enough for me to notice. And for him, Mark, to notice too. There was silence. Not long. Maybe a beat and a half. But it was enough. Amelia let out a laugh. "Oh my God! This again?" She bent down, picked up the card, and waved it in the air like it was some kind of inside joke. "It's from that stupid Langston campaign we did last month. Remember?" she said, nudging Mark with her elbow. "Those ridiculous hotel promos with the cheesy, romantic getaway angle? We handed these out like candy at the launch. Swag for the couples market." The people around us chuckled. A few of them nodded like they remembered. Mark smiled, but it was tight. His eyes darted toward me and then back to his drink. Amelia was already sliding the card back into her clutch, laughing again, this time louder. "God, I really need to clean out my bag," she added, rolling her eyes. "You'd think I lived out of it." Laughter. Real or fake, I couldn't tell. Everyone relaxed. The awkward moment dissolved like sugar in champagne. Everyone except me. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. I set my glass down on the edge of the nearest table, right next to an empty flute. And then, without any grand gesture or dramatic pause, I slipped my wedding ring off my finger and placed it neatly on the silver tray a passing waiter was carrying. No one noticed. She kept laughing, kept smiling, kept being the perfect version of herself for everyone else in the room. I turned and walked out, didn't look back, didn't wait for her to follow. The cold outside hit like a slap. October in New York. Biting wind, the kind that cuts through your suit like it's nothing. But I barely felt it. My heart wasn't racing. I wasn't panicking. I just felt still, like something inside me had gone quiet. Like all the questions I'd been ignoring for months had finally fallen into place. And that little card, the one she laughed off, the one everyone brushed aside, was the last piece. It wasn't just what it said. It was how she handled it. Too smooth, too quick. Too familiar. She didn't stammer. Didn't fumble. She had a story ready. A souvenir from a past event? Maybe. But why was it still in her clutch weeks later? Why now? Why tonight? I sat on the steps outside the venue for a long time. Watched couples stumble out drunk and happy. Watched black cars pull up to the curb and disappear into the night. I pulled out my phone once, thumb hovering over her contact, but I didn't call. What was I going to say? Was that really just swag? Should I believe you? No. If I had to ask those questions, I already had the answer. And here's the thing. It wasn't the card that broke me. It was how comfortable she was lying to a room full of people, including me. That moment showed me exactly where I stood in her world. Not as a partner. Not as someone to protect. As a liability to manage. I don't remember how long I stayed out there. Long enough for the city to feel less overwhelming. Long enough to watch my breath curl in front of me and remind myself I was still here, still breathing, even if everything else was unraveling. Eventually, I stood up, buttoned my coat, and walked. Not home. Not to a friend's place. Just away. From the gala. From the noise. From the version of my life I thought was still intact. She didn't call that night. Didn't text. Maybe she thought I needed space. Or maybe she knew I wouldn't believe another word. I didn't sleep. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling of a hotel room I booked on the other side of the city. The irony wasn't lost on me. Room for one. No breakfast. Just me and a silence that didn't feel peaceful, it felt final. The morning after the gala, I woke up in a room that didn't feel like anything. The kind of hotel room you check into when you want to be anonymous. Beige walls. Thin curtains. A ticking clock that didn't belong to anyone. I hadn't even bothered to undress. Just collapsed onto the bed in my suit, tie half undone, staring at the ceiling like it might give me answers. Didn't. The sunlight filtered in weakly, and my phone was still silent. No messages. No missed calls. No Amelia. I got up, ran cold water over my face, and just stood there for a while, gripping the edges of the sink like I was trying to hold on to something that wasn't slipping through my hands. But it was. I could feel it. As I stepped out into the cold morning air, I tried to make sense of it all. Not just the hotel card, not just the lie dressed up as a joke. Everything. All the little cracks I had ignored. The subtle signs that I told myself were nothing. Funny how hindsight works. I started walking. Nowhere in particular, just moving. I needed the motion. Needed the rhythm of footsteps to drown out the thoughts. And as I walked, I let myself go back. Not just to last night, but to the last few months. Amelia had been different. Not in a way that screamed something's wrong, but in a way that whispered it quietly, insistently, like a low hum in the background. You don't notice at first. You just adjust to the sound. She'd started working late more often. Said the company was restructuring. Said there were new deadlines, new clients, new initiatives. At first I believed her, of course I did. She was ambitious. Dedicated. That was part of what I loved about her. But then came the other things. She began silencing her phone in the evenings, turning off location sharing for privacy. I asked her once, jokingly, if she was planning a surprise for me. She laughed it off. I'm not plotting your birthday, if that's what you're fishing for. She'd always been witty, sharp, but lately her jokes had more bite than charm. Then there was the cologne. Not mine. Not anything I'd ever worn. It was subtle, but it clung to her like a memory. The first time I caught it, I didn't say anything. Maybe someone hugged her. Maybe a colleague wore too much. But it kept happening. Once, twice, then regularly, on the nights she came home late, hair perfect, makeup redone. I asked her about it. She shrugged. Elevators are tight. You know how it is. And I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe her. But the stories stopped aligning. The timelines got fuzzy. She'd say she was at one place, but then mention something from a different part of town. Said she was in meetings but posted a selfie in a rooftop bar. Then deleted it. Oh, that was old. I just liked the lighting, she'd say. She stopped asking me about my day. I noticed that too. At dinner with friends, she started making little jabs at my work. Nothing overt, just light teasing. She'd call my workshop antique therapy. Laugh when people asked about it. I'd play along, but something in her tone stung. It used to be admiration. Now it was amusement. Like I was quaint. Like I was part of some past she had outgrown. She'd be half present at meals. One hand on her phone, eyes flicking down every few seconds. Always smiling at messages she wouldn't explain. When I brought it up, she acted surprised. God, you're so paranoid lately. Was I? Maybe. But paranoia doesn't grow from nowhere. It feeds on details, the ones people overlook. Like the hotel receipts. That was another one. I found one folded between magazines in the living room. A hotel we'd never stayed at. She claimed it was from a corporate offsite. Shared room? I asked. She laughed. It's a billing error. I was there alone. Want me to call them? I said no. But that night I couldn't sleep. Or the email notification that popped up on her laptop while she was in the shower. Reservation confirmed. A boutique hotel, a weeknight, 2 guests. When I asked, she barely blinked. I canceled that. It was for a friend. Don't snoop. That word. Snoop. As if I was the one crossing lines. I let it go. Again. I kept thinking. What kind of man would I be if I didn't trust my wife? What kind of marriage did we have if suspicion was my default? But trust isn't blind. It's built. And I realized hers had been slowly tearing itself down while I wasn't looking. That morning I walked for miles. My feet were numb. My hands shoved deep in my coat pockets. Heart thudding with every step. The streets of New York are good for that. You can be anyone in a crowd. You can unravel in silence and no one will care. Somewhere near the East River, I sat on a bench and pulled out my phone. Still nothing from Amelia. Still radio silence. A woman who never missed a chance to send a selfie. Now suddenly too busy to check in. I stared at the screen, tempted to text her something. We need to talk, or what was that last night? But I didn't. Instead, I opened the gallery. Scrolled through old photos. Us at the coast. Laughing in a rental car. Her hand on mine at some overpriced restaurant in Paris. Her leaning against my workshop table. Smudges of paint on her dress. Watching me fix an old clock. She used to love that part of my life. Said it made her feel like time could be repaired. Looking at those photos now felt like staring at strangers. Was she already gone in those moments? Was she already drifting away while I was too busy polishing the past? A chill ran through me, but not from the wind. I didn't have proof. Not yet. Not the kind you can print and hold and throw on the table in a confrontation. But I had something else. That feeling. The one you get when your gut knows what your heart doesn't want to admit. The lie didn't start last night at the gala. It started months ago. I just didn't want to see it. And last night wasn't some accident. It wasn't some awkward misunderstanding. It was her losing control of a story she thought she could manage. The card fell out, and for a split second her world tilted. And mine broke open. You learn a lot in those slips. Not from the act itself, but from the way people respond. And Amelia? She didn't apologize. Didn't run after me. Didn't call, didn't cry, didn't offer a whisper of doubt that I might have misunderstood. She turned it into a joke. And everyone laughed. Everyone but me. I stood up from the bench and kept walking. I didn't know where I was headed yet, but I knew one thing for sure. She had stopped looking for us a long time ago. It was 3 days after the gala when everything finally snapped. Up until that point, I'd been walking through my life like I was wearing someone else's shoes. Nothing fit. Nothing felt right. I was still going through the motions. I showed up to the workshop, took a few calls, replied to emails like I wasn't unraveling. But I wasn't really there. Not mentally. Not emotionally. Not in any way that counted. Amelia and I barely spoke during those days. When she came home, she'd be humming like nothing happened. Like I hadn't walked out of a ballroom while she held court next to a man I couldn't even stand to look at anymore. She didn't mention the ring I left behind. Didn't ask where I'd gone. She acted like we were fine. That's what hurt the most. The pretending. Her complete indifference to my absence. The night I came home early wasn't planned. I hadn't been trying to catch her in the act. Honestly, I was just tired. Not the kind of tired a nap could fix. The kind that settles in your bones when you've been holding up too much for too long. I'd left the workshop early, thinking maybe I'd cook. Maybe we could finally talk. Foolish optimism, I guess. It was quiet when I walked in. Too quiet. I remember the first thing I noticed was the scent, soft, floral, but not hers. Not what she usually wore. It was unfamiliar. New. Then I saw the wine glasses. 2 of them. Still wet with condensation. Still red at the bottom. And then I heard it, laughter. Not hers alone. A low, familiar voice. A man's voice. My stomach dropped. It was faint, muffled behind the closed bedroom door. But I knew that laugh. I'd heard it at the gala. Over cocktails. Over forced small talk. Mark. I froze in the hallway. My hand hovered near the doorknob, but I didn't move. I just stared at the reflection of myself in the glass of the hallway cabinet. This still, pale version of a man who already knew what was on the other side of that door. I didn't need to hear any more. I didn't need to see it. There's a moment people talk about in stories, when someone catches their partner cheating, and everything explodes in yelling and crying and confrontation. This wasn't like that. There was no rage, no panic, just clarity, cold and sharp. I turned the knob slowly and pushed the door open. The room was empty. At first glance, it looked undisturbed. But I noticed the small things. Her heels tossed near the edge of the bed. A jacket slung over the back of the chair. The sheets slightly pulled down on both sides. I stepped in. The air still held the warmth of 2 people. The scent of wine. The faint trace of sweat. On the vanity, there it was. That same damn hotel card. The one from the gala. She hadn't even bothered to hide it. Just left it there like a calling card. Room for 2. Breakfast included. That was all the proof I needed. I didn't need to find them tangled in bed. I didn't need to hear them whispering. The truth was already in the room, sitting between the half-empty glasses and the freshly made lies. She wasn't just drifting anymore. She was gone. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. The mattress still held their shape. Still cradled the betrayal like a memory that hadn't cooled yet. My hands were steady. My heart wasn't racing. That surprised me. What I felt wasn't shock. It was confirmation. The kind you never want but can't turn away from once it arrives. At some point, I stood up and walked into the kitchen. I stared at the fridge, then the hallway, then the door. I don't know what I was waiting for. Maybe for her to come out. Maybe for him to. But no one did. I guess they heard me come in and slipped out the back. Like cowards. Like ghosts. The silence in that apartment was so loud it felt physical. Like I could touch it. Like it could crush me if I stood still for too long. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat at the kitchen table, watching the front door, listening to every creak of the building, waiting for footsteps that never came. She didn't come home. Not that night. Not the next morning. I didn't call her. Didn't text. What was there left to say? The next day, she walked in like nothing had happened. Dropped her keys on the table. Said she had a rough night at work. Didn't meet my eyes. Went straight for the fridge. Asked if we had orange juice. I stared at her like she was speaking a foreign language. Like she was an actress auditioning for the role of someone who hadn't just destroyed everything we built. You were here, I said finally. She turned, playing confused. What? Here. With him. Her expression didn't crack. She tilted her head like I was being dramatic. What are you talking about? I came home early. Her hand froze on the fridge door. She was quiet for a beat too long. Then she forced a laugh. You're being ridiculous. There were 2 glasses, I said. Your perfume wasn't the same. There was laughter. Still she didn't admit it. Instead, she said, Are you really going to start this again? That's when I realized. She was never going to tell me the truth. Not unless I cornered her. Not unless I dragged it out of her inch by inch. But I didn't want the truth anymore. I already had it. So I walked out. Again. Same coat. Same keys in my pocket. But this time, no ring to leave behind. That was already gone. I ended up at a diner on 10th and West. The kind that hasn't changed in 30 years. Vinyl booths. Coffee that tastes like burnt soil. A waitress who doesn't ask questions unless it's about refills. I sat there for hours. Let the noise of plates clinking and low conversation wrap around me like armor. It was comforting. It was real. More real than the lie I had been living in. When I finally got up to leave, I left cash on the table and walked out into the night. I didn't know what I was walking toward yet, but I knew what I was leaving behind. Not just Amelia, but the version of her I had loved. Because whoever she was now, this woman who laughed at hotel cards and lied without blinking, she wasn't mine anymore. And maybe she never really was. I didn't go home right after the diner. I drove aimlessly for a while, circling blocks I didn't even know, watching the city blur past through the windshield like an old film reel. Streetlights streaked across the glass. My hands stayed at 10 and 2 even though my mind was somewhere else entirely. Each red light felt longer than the last. Each turn felt like I was postponing the inevitable. Eventually, without even thinking, I found myself heading toward my workshop. It wasn't a decision, it was muscle memory. Whenever life got heavy, that space had been my refuge. A quiet room full of ticking and whirring and the smell of oil and wood. Time always felt different there, like it was something you could hold, something you could fix if you were careful enough. When I unlocked the door, the familiar creak echoed louder than usual. The shop was dim, the late afternoon light slanting through the high windows in thin, dusty beams. My tools were where I'd left them, lined up with a precision that felt almost ceremonial. For a moment, I stood there at the threshold, just breathing it in. The scent of varnish, old books, brass gears. Normally it calmed me. This time it only made my chest ache. I walked to the center of the room, running my hand over the workbench. There were small shavings of wood from the last repair I'd been working on. A 19th century clock with a cracked face. The parts were still laid out neatly, waiting for me to bring it back to life. Everything about it felt familiar, controllable. But my life outside these walls no longer did. Then I noticed it. A scarf draped over the back of the stool. Deep blue with a faint floral pattern. Amelia's. She had been here recently. It wasn't unusual for her to stop by. She liked the space. Said it felt like a museum you can touch. But lately she hadn't come by at all. Seeing her scarf there, out of place and recent, made something tighten in my gut. I turned to the big oak cabinet where I keep my order books. It's an old ledger system. No spreadsheets, no apps. Just handwritten notes of every client, every repair, every transaction. When I opened it, one page was already flipped up, as if someone had been reading it. Her handwriting jumped out at me immediately. Not my careful block letters, hers. Smooth, slanted, unmistakable. She'd made a note right under the most recent entry. Mark Taylor, antique clock, gift, date TBD. I stared at it until the words stopped looking like words. Mark Taylor, her boss. The same man whose voice I had heard in our bedroom. The same man at the gala. The same name now scrawled in my book, connected to an antique clock. A gift. My hands went cold. She hadn't just betrayed me emotionally. She'd come here, used my space, my tools, my craft, my time. She'd ordered, through me, a gift for the man she was sleeping with. The realization hit like a physical blow. I sat down hard on the floor, my back against the cabinet. The cool concrete pressed through my coat. For a long time, I didn't move. Memories of us in this workshop flickered through my mind like old slides. Amelia sitting on the counter, swinging her legs while I adjusted a delicate gear. Amelia brushing dust off an old watch and asking me about its history. Amelia saying she loved that I brought time back to life. All of it had felt so genuine. Now it felt like a rehearsal for this moment, like she had been laying the groundwork for months. I picked up the scarf and pressed it to my face. It still smelled like her perfume, but weaker, mixed with the scent of my shop. Felt like holding a ghost. I tried to think of explanations. Maybe she was buying the clock for someone else. Maybe Mark Taylor was a cover for a different recipient. But every rationalization collapsed under the weight of the facts. Her handwriting, the timing, the hotel card, the wine glasses. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a one-off lapse in judgment. This was a system, pattern, a life she had built alongside mine, hidden in plain sight. I got up slowly, my knees stiff. My reflection stared back at me from the glass of a grandfather clock by the wall. My face looked older, heavier. A man I barely recognized. I reached for the clock parts on my workbench but stopped. My hands were shaking. I couldn't focus on gears or springs. Not now. Not while everything else was falling apart. I sat back down on the floor, my back against the cold cabinet, and let the weight of it all sink in. This was the place I came to escape noise, to fix things. But nothing in this room could fix what was happening to me now. No gear, no pendulum, no careful adjustment could rewind a marriage built on lies. Somewhere outside, a car horn blared, faint through the windows. Time was still moving on without me. I thought about how Amelia had once said, "I love that you work with clocks. You make the past live again." She'd said it like a compliment, but now it felt like a warning. She had taken my hands, these hands that restored heirlooms, and used them to craft a gift for another man. I pressed my palms against the cold floor until they hurt. It grounded me, reminded me I was still here, even if everything else had shifted. I realized then that what I'd been feeling since the gala wasn't just suspicion. It wasn't even heartbreak. It was a slow-motion collapse. A building being demolished from the inside out. And here, sitting on the floor of my own sanctuary, I finally understood. The betrayal wasn't a flash fire. It wasn't a moment. It was a system she had built, calculated, deliberate, and patient. And I had been part of it without knowing. A few days passed. I don't remember them clearly. It felt like time existed in fragments, chopped up into aimless tasks, unanswered texts, moments of silence filled with static. I stayed in the workshop more than usual. I slept on the old pull-out couch in the back, using a pile of coats as a blanket. I didn't want to go home, not because I was afraid of her, but because I didn't want to see what we used to be, now rotting quietly in plain sight. One afternoon I decided to clean. Not because I cared about tidiness, but because doing something with my hands kept me from screaming. I wiped down shelves, sorted old watch straps, reorganized drawers of brass fasteners and antique screws. Anything to feel like I still had control over something. When I reached the display shelf on the east wall, the one where I kept rare personal pieces, family keepsakes, things not for sale, I noticed a gap. It was small but obvious, like a missing tooth. The space where my grandfather's clock had always been. Gone. At first I thought maybe I'd moved it during a repair and forgotten. But no, I never moved that clock. Ever. It was a 1927 heirloom. Oak frame, hand-cut face, slight crack in the lower glass pane from a childhood accident. It was the first clock I ever repaired as a kid, under my grandfather's supervision. The only thing of his I still had. I stood there staring at the empty space for way too long. Then I started searching. Frantically, I tore through the shop, opened cabinets, checked repair logs, checked the order book again, though I knew exactly what it would say. My hands were sweating. My heart hammered in my chest. It was gone. I didn't just lose a clock. I lost a piece of my past. And somehow, deep down, I already knew who had taken it. I grabbed my laptop and pulled up the email account tied to client inquiries. Most of it was noise, shipping confirmations, spam, boring correspondence. But buried in the sent folder was something I hadn't written. Not in my words. Not in my tone. An email sent under my name from my account. To a boutique restoration client. The subject, clock ready for pickup. The message, fully restored. No suspicion. He won't notice. It's the perfect gift. Perfect gift. Those words hit like a slap. The email was signed off as me. But it wasn't me. The language wasn't mine. It was too breezy, too confident. I read it 3 times, trying to force it to make sense, trying to believe it was meant for someone else, something else. But it wasn't. It was her. I knew the way she wrote, the way she structured sentences, the way she used lowercase for casual charm. This was Amelia, pretending to be me. sending off the clock I'd held on to for decades. My grandfather's legacy. Like it was nothing. And the worst part? She was right. I hadn't noticed. Until it was already gone. I closed the laptop and just sat there, staring at nothing. The rage didn't come the way I expected. It didn't explode. It leaked in slowly, like cold water through a crack in the ceiling. It soaked everything in me. She hadn't just lied. She hadn't just slept with someone else. She took the one thing I treasured most and turned it into a bargaining chip in whatever secret life she was building. This wasn't about infidelity anymore. This was about theft. Not of property, but of history, of meaning, of everything that made me me. She had gone into the most sacred part of my world and hollowed it out to impress someone else. And I hadn't even seen it happen. I reached for my phone. My hands trembled. I wanted to call her, confront her, scream until my voice gave out. But I didn't. Instead, I opened the browser and searched the last tracking number used on outgoing shipments from the shop. I'd recently switched to a service that logged all activity through the cloud, mostly for insurance purposes. There it was, a delivery log 2 weeks ago, addressed to Mark Taylor's office, signed by a receptionist, confirmed delivered. I leaned back in the chair and stared at the ceiling, heart pounding, jaw locked so tight I thought it might crack. I tried to think of what that clock had meant to me as a kid. The smell of the wood, the feel of the winding key, the way the second hand used to stick for a beat and then catch up with a double tick. That clock was the reason I became who I was. And now it was just gone. Not broken. Not lost. Given away. As a gift. To the man she replaced me with. I felt something inside me shift in that moment. Like a boundary that had held for too long finally gave out. The grief turned into anger. Not rage. Not fire. Cold anger. Heavy and quiet. I realized then that she hadn't just erased our marriage. She had rewritten it. Rewritten who I was in it. Used my hands. Used my craft. Used my legacy. And for what? To show off? To manipulate? To see if she could? I thought back to the night I walked out of the gala. How calm I was. How I thought I was doing the dignified thing. Stepping away quietly, giving space, holding on to some idea of self-respect. But now, looking at the shipping confirmation, the fake email, the empty space on the shelf, I knew I'd been played. I stood up from my chair, suddenly too wired to sit still. I paced, picked things up, put them down. My head was spinning. My body was restless, filled with too much energy and nowhere to put it. Then I stopped. The empty shelf was still in front of me, still aching. And I thought, she used the best part of me to lie. That's when the numbness began to fade. In its place, purpose. She may have taken something irreplaceable, but what she didn't take was the truth. And I was done pretending I didn't care.